Good evening. It's Tuesday, October 25th of 2022. This is the Stoughton City Council meeting, and we'll start out with the roll call here. I'll go through it. It looks like Candy's logging in now, but we'll get started. Caravello?
Here.
Hiley?
Here.
Hirsch?
Here.
Hunt?
Here.
Jensen?
Here.
Lagaki?
Here.
Majewski?
Here.
Raff?
Here.
Reeves?
Here.
And Schumacher?
Here.
Tukowski?
Here.
And I believe Venegas is absent and excused tonight. So minutes and reports are in the packet. Next item will be public comment period. And I do have one person signed up to speak, and that would be Charles Buck Sweeney. And you can come to the microphone. And then the floor is yours for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is Buck Sweeney. I'm with the law firm of Axley down in Janesville office, and I'm representing over 100 residents who are vehemently opposed to the removal of the dam. These people have riparian rights along the river. They have concerns on the aesthetic beauty that they have on this, and they think what the city is doing, which I agree with, is making a huge mistake by taking out this dam. You have two engineering firms that have competing opinions on whether or not how much the water is going to be lowered. What we've asked the Army Corps of Engineers is for them to do an economic impact, environmental impact statement to determine which of these engineers are right. Once you remove that dam, it's never going to go back in. So if we remove the dam, you want to make sure that it's not going to have an adverse effect on the upgraded residents. Those upgraded residents' property values are going to go down considerably if you lower that water, and tax base is going to go down within the city. Having a dam removed for some kayakers, for the benefit of very few people at the expense of people who have lived on this river all their lives, is a drastic mistake. We have asked the Army Corps of Engineers to conduct a hearing on this and look at it. We've also asked them to do the environmental impact statement. If this goes through, we plan to challenge this both through an administrative law hearing in the circuit courts, and that will take at least several years before anything gets done. And we will plan to do this because we think the city's making a big mistake. One option would be for the city to consider a referendum, because my view is that the residents of the city of Stoughton and the surrounding area really do not want this dam removed, and you're making a big mistake that you can never go backward. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And that's all I had signed up for the public comment. I do have a couple that registered that I'll pass on to the clerk. Next item would be communications and presentations. Are there any communications from council members this evening? Okay, no communications. I guess we do have one quick presentation, and this is coming from our county supervisor. Engelberger is here tonight, and he's just going to give us a quick update.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. How's everybody doing?
Good.
I just wanted to give you a quick update about what I'm doing as your Dane County supervisor. I'm planning on putting out just an informational newsletter. It's already listed up on my website. There's a blog where you can go to the Dane County website and click on Board of Supervisors, and then you can click on, I gotta get it open here again. I believe it's just updates. If you go to my web page, Dane County Supervisor, District 35, sign up for district updates, and you can get emails whenever I put a new newsletter on. I'm just planning on doing that maybe a couple times a year. Basically, the first one is right here. I've got some in the back if anybody's interested. The first one, I'm just basically putting on there what the board is, what the committees that I'm on are. I'm on 6 committees. And just basically an informative newsletter to keep the constituents of District 35 up to date. And I'm looking for input of anybody that's interested in giving input. And so I just thought I'd put that out there. Right now, we're working on the budget, like you guys are. And so that's all I wanted to do, is just inform you of what's going on a little bit. And anybody's got any questions, they can let me know. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, are there any communications from council members? And I just had one, in case you missed it. We did reach an agreement with the Sunlanes regarding the trees on Rose Street, so that's good news. I'd like to thank the city attorney and his staff for helping us through that process. So everything is signed, sealed, and delivered. Rodney, can you just give us a quick update on the work out there?
I can start by saying we wish it was farther than it is, but they did make some progress last week. They got the curb and gutter installed out on Rose Street. They were scheduled to do some paving tomorrow, but it looks like it's probably going to be Thursday at this point for that Rose Street segment. We're continuing to push a separate contractor on the Academy Street work as well, which is also lagging behind the schedule and behind our deadlines. So we're anxiously awaiting them to complete those particular streets in the next 2 weeks.
All right, thank you. Any questions? Hearing none, we'll move to our action items. The first one is the consent agenda. There's 4 items in there. I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
A motion by Legaki. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Majewski. Yep. Any discussion, or would anybody like anything acted on separately from the consent agenda? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
And any opposed? None opposed, that motion does carry. New business is ordinance 26, and this is going to be a first reading. And this one comes from the Plan Commission, Alderperson Caravello.
Thank you. Yes, this is first reading of ordinance 26 of 2022, approving a plan development, general development plan for lots 1, 3, and 4 within the 51 West development.
All righty. Any initial questions on this one? Alderperson Hunt?
I was noticing the number of units per lot has changed. I was wondering, are we increasing that total number of units for the area?
Yes, we are. Director Shield, I think I have it on the screen right now.
Yeah, that's actually the change is actually increasing the density. The number of units, there's 3 particular lots. Each building would be a duplex, but there's more duplexes on each parcel. We've reviewed it at a staff level. The utilities is considered related to the capacity, and everything seems like it'll work well. Plan Commission unanimously supports moving forward with the increased density on these parcels.
The total number of units increases from the original plan, which was 30 to 38.
All right, any other questions on this one?
I had a question.
Okay, go ahead.
I see that they're duplexes, but somewhere I read in all this information that owners will be on site. So are they actually condos, or how is that working?
Mayor, I can
Okay, go
explain. They intend to actually go through a replatting process to create parcels for each of these units and then split them off as 0 lot line structures. So they'd be single or 2 owners, 1 for each side of each duplex. So it would be on separate parcels. So we anticipate that replatting of this area to follow the rezoning request.
Is there a
Also,
follow-up? Oh, go ahead.
Well, also I had a follow-up question. I mean, I see that when you go through all the recommendations or what they're doing with their buildings, I mean, just glaringly, what stands out is that there's no, and I know this is something that we all need to work on, but there's no kind of green infrastructure that is actually even listed, like, good windows, that the garages will have EV vehicle ready outlets, that the roofs will be solar ready. None of that. Is there a way going forward that we can start including some of those in, our plan development? It seems like a no-brainer at this point.
Certainly, there's opportunities to modify the ordinances to prescribe the standards that you're speaking of. Those would have to be developed and worked through the approval process and incorporated into the code of ordinances. They could also be-
Attorney Dragney has a comment too.
Yeah, this is, this is, it gets a little complicated, because, some of the things that you're describing, are, for example, covered by building codes that we don't have authority as a city to, change. So then the question is, well, are there opportunities to require things to be done differently than would otherwise be allowed under building codes, for example, when someone is seeking approval of, say, plan development zoning, or perhaps they're seeking tax increment financing? And the answer to that is, probably yes. I'm not, but it's a little bit complicated because, if the question is, do we want to develop some kind of policies or either ordinance or otherwise that we would then use whenever we're presented with, say, plan development zoning or a TIF request or something, that is a conversation we can have, but we'd need to get working on that. The council would need to give us some direction in terms of what are you trying to accomplish, and these are not simple issues to tackle in my experience.
If we send you, like, I know Denver and Miami and a few other cities around US just have new ordinances that they actually did put out about buildings needing to be more energy efficient and definitely solar ready. If we start it there, is that a good place to start?
So I think there are kind of two things that we'd have to think about. One is what you just described, exactly what are you trying to accomplish? And what do you want, for example, developers or property owners to do? And so if you've got materials from other communities that provide, some direction on what you're trying to accomplish there, that would certainly be helpful. And then the next thing we would have to figure out is, okay, what tools do we have available, and when do we have those tools available to actually achieve those things? When can we require that those things be incorporated in say a building project? So that's something we can get started on if the council wants, and the kind of materials you're describing would be helpful in that direction.
Okay, thanks.
Alderperson Reeves.
It was answered, thank you.
All right. Anybody else? This is the first reading, so it'll be back on November 15th. So if you have any questions between now and then, feel free to reach out to Rodney or myself, and we'll be glad to provide answers. Next item is also a first reading, and that's going to be Ordinance 27, and this one also came from the Plan Commission, Alderperson Caravello.
Thank you. This is 027 of 2022, an ordinance amending section 78-015 and 78-105, repealing and recreating section 78-206, parentheses 7th, parentheses C, and amending Appendix C to Chapter 78 of the Stoughton Code of Ordinances relating to mobile service support structures.
Easy for you to say.
That was a lot.
It is a lot. Do you want to describe it? Otherwise, we have help here.
This is, mobile service support structures, are actually what I think are more commonly referred to as cell phone towers. And this is to amend the zoning to allow these structures to be installed according to state requirements. But yes, there will be much better ways to explain what this is if people have questions for
All right.
folks present.
Attorney Massey.
Yeah, I can give a sort of a, try to be brief in an explanation of what this does. So just for a little bit of background information, I'd say over the last 5 to 10 years, state law has gone through a sea change in curtailing local regulation of mobile towers. So basically what's happened is the state has said that local governments are going to be very restricted in what they can do in exercising their zoning authority to regulate the location and the overall placement of mobile support structures. So for instance, a state law has said that you can't prohibit these in any zoning district. You can't deny an application based on aesthetic concerns. You can't have a setback greater than what your regular setback is for other structures in your zoning districts. So really what the legislature has done is severely curtailed what you're able to do as far as these mobile structures go. So we've been working with planning and zoning because the city's ordinances haven't necessarily kept up with state law. So for instance, your zoning code prohibits mobile towers in almost every district. And in other districts, there are conditional uses, which I can explain a little bit how that might work. But overall, the zoning ordinances just haven't kept up with these support structures. So we've been working with planning and development to figure out ways that we can try to regulate these. So one area that the state has actually left to local governments is setbacks in zoning districts that allow for single-family residential. So basically, in those zoning districts or in parcels that are adjacent to those zoning districts, you can establish a setback that's equal to the height of the tower. So that's what we've done in this ordinance, is try to utilize that one pathway of regulation. So in working with planning and zoning, they believe that based on the lot sizes that we have zoning districts that allow for single family residential and those that would be adjacent to those types of parcels, it's effectively going to encourage the cell phone providers to install these mobile support structures in other zoning districts such as industrial and commercial. And therefore, it's going to be very difficult to find a parcel that you could actually place a support structure on a residential parcel. So like I mentioned before, you're prohibited from prohibiting these in any zoning district. One avenue of potential regulation that we looked at was making these conditional uses in some zoning districts. But getting into the conditional use law, in 2017, the legislature passed another law that really tries to rein in the conditional use process. So if you're going to have a conditional use, you have to have measurable standards, or I guess you could say objective standards. So if you're going to make these a conditional use, then it really comes down to what standards can we create to effectively regulate these, and can we create standards that are actually going to pass muster with state law. So in working with planning and development, we tried to figure out if there was a way to do this, but another sort of challenge that comes up in regulating these as conditional uses is, what's the role of the city, what's the role of city staff? So if an applicant comes in and, let's say we have a condition that says you can't lower property values on any adjacent properties. Well, if the applicant comes in and says we've got evidence that shows property values won't decrease because of our tower, then is staff supposed to go out and do their own study? Are we just supposed to rely on public comment for this? It just gets very complicated and could just lead to some further legal issues in the future. So what we determined was sort of the best course of action is what we've presented tonight, where we make mobile towers a permitted use in every zoning district, but we install the setback in all zoning districts that allow for single-family residential, or if the parcel is located on a parcel that is adjacent to a parcel that allows for single-family residential. So because of those setback requirements, setting it to the height of the tower, we feel that will effectively encourage these in other more advantageous zoning districts. So that's sort of the 30,000-foot view. But we tried to find the right balance here of effectively regulating these, but also making it easy to administer. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from any alders on this one, or anything you want to add, Director Shield?
No, we did deliberate over this at a couple of different plan commission meetings, and I think that while the consensus was support for this ordinance as presented, after the discussion related to the conditional use, we exhausted that fairly thoroughly at that commission and tried to explore all the options. This seems like one that helps protect what we believe to be the interest in keeping them out of primarily single-family residential areas.
Yeah, and just to get on my soapbox for a little while, I mean, these are two examples that were just mentioned tonight of the state legislators taking away local control, which I think is outrageous. We should have more control, not less. I think we can do just fine managing our city, and I know others can as well. So I'm really discouraged by that. The other thing that concerns me is our ordinance is good in areas that would be for single-family homes, but there may be some other homes that aren't designated for single families that could be affected, which raises kind of a equity issue with me. So I'm also not really too pleased about that either. So, I mean, these are the types of things that we continue to talk about at the state level, but they continue to fall on deaf ears. So just wanted to point that out. I don't know if anybody else has any comments or questions about this issue, but that's my 2 cents worth.
Mary, I enjoy your 2 cents, and I also like to support or ask why it has to be a single family. Maybe you covered this and I just wasn't understanding. I too am not satisfied that folks that live in multi-family units can be subjected to this. I mean, I think it is an equity issue and economic issue. So if you can't afford a single family, you can have a cell phone tower next to you. I think it's really a poor statement. So is there anything we can do to make sure that this also includes multifamily units?
I think I can help by clarifying the point. Most of the multifamily units allow for single-family units to be constructed in them, and this preempts them from being able to build on those parcels as well with a tower because it allows for a single family to be constructed on multifamily parcels. So I think we're trying to close that as tightly as we can, and we capture it because our zoning code allows for single-family units to be built in some of our multifamily districts as well.
Yeah, and
So the areas that are currently have only multifamily units, they wouldn't, even though it might be zoned for single family, would they be allowed to put a cell phone tower in there?
So allowable uses in most of our multifamily districts allow for single-family units to be built. Whether they're built there now or not, it's the allowance of if they're allowed to be built in that district, this would preclude them from being able to be constructed on that site.
Right, so basically what state law says is, and I apologize if I didn't specify this, but so state law essentially says if there's a zoning district that allows for single-family residential, it doesn't have to be that the parcel is actually actively used for single-family. It's just, does the zoning district allow for single-family residential? And if that's the case, then you can install this higher setback. So you could have property that is zoned multifamily, but or that allows for multifamily and actively used as multifamily, but because that district also would allow for single-family residential, this setback would apply there. I'm sure there are zoning districts that this wouldn't capture that if it's multifamily and there's no single-family permitted, but this is as far as state law allows us to go, unfortunately.
Thank you for that. Attorney Dragney?
Rick, can I ask just a question, follow up on that? So we're just looking at a plan development zoning discussion. We're just talking about plan development zoning. So let's say we had a plan development zoning district that was designed for multifamily housing. Would that be a situation where in order to be able to, well, I guess the question is how would we manage this issue in the context of plan development zoning?
Right, so because it's a planned development, unless you're saying single family is a permitted use with that planned development, this setback wouldn't apply. If you're dealing with, TIF funding, potentially there's a way to say that as a restrictive covenant of some sort, no mobile towers would be allowed. So that's one way to potentially capture that, as having it a covenant that's running with the land. That's more of a policy decision, I guess, but it's not exactly something we could put in the code, I believe.
So it sounds like, though, at least it raises the question when we're looking at a plan development, whether we ought to craft the general development plan in such a way that, if it's really designed for multifamily and that's what it is intended, at least one question that ought to be asked is, do we need to be concerned about towers going in? And if so, how do we address that in the general development plan? So something for us to think about, I guess, on plan developments.
Also, Rodney, is there any district, any neighborhood that is multifamily that is not zoned to also have single family? Is there a way that we could then rezone those areas to also include single family?
That's a deep question. I can't say unilaterally there aren't any possibilities for that to occur, or that we could rezone them to allow for that. Again, we're trying to look at this on a global scale, but when we get down to the granular level, there might be instances where they could be allowed. The one that was just mentioned is these planned development districts that are geared towards a higher density. Those are sites that we might have to look at accommodating differently going forward.
Yeah, I'd rather get ahead of this and start identifying working on this now versus when a cell phone company comes in and they've done our work and we have it and they picked a spot that we really didn't want a cell phone tower. And it's just...
To date, we've been able to administratively, if you will, guide them to less populated areas. The discussion's been encouraged about industrial areas or somewhat more remote open space areas. So we're certainly cognizant of the desire, and at least at an administrative level, we're having those conversations with potential siting companies.
Okay, thanks, Rodney, for all your work. Way to dissuade people.
Alderperson Jensen?
Rodney, quick question. Are there any cell phone tower companies out there right now looking to?
Yeah, we have a couple of them that are snooping around. Some have been snooping for a couple of years.
Okay.
And, we've been trying to grapple with this issue about how to regulate them, understanding how the state law has changed and how our ordinances haven't changed with the times completely. But I think, as I just mentioned, we've been, at this point, successful in trying to guide them to areas that I think meet the community interest in trying not having them close to residential, single-family residential
So there's
properties.
some urgency or yeah, I'd say urgency in trying to do exactly what Regina was saying, to look at that then. That's something that planning needs to look at then.
Yeah, I certainly think my recommendation would be move forward with this ordinance, get it on the books instead of delaying this, and try to see if there's additional areas where we might have to reinforce it more.
Oh, Roddy, I never said delay this. I
No,
just said, let's
no,
make
I
sure that we're have our eyes wide open and we're moving forward. And it seems like you already are, by having this ordinance revamped, they're already thinking of it. So I greatly appreciate that. I just want us to continue to look forward so we don't get surprised at some point.
Understood.
All right, anybody else on this topic tonight? This is a first reading. And we'll see this one next month as well. Next item is Resolution 202 of 2022. This one is coming from the Plan Commission, and it should read that it was actually approved by the Plan Commission on September 12th. So we just got to make that minor change. Alderperson Caravello.
Yes, thank you. This is approving a certified survey map to split the parcel at 1008 Riverview Drive into 2 parcels, and I so move.
Is there a second?
Second?
Second by Alderperson Hunt. Alderperson Caravello.
And this is simply to split this lot to create an additional single-family lot.
All right. Anything you want to add on this one, Director Shield?
I think you recall we saw the rezoning portion of this already. This would just allow that split to occur on this parcel.
Any questions from alders? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
And any opposed?
Is there a second?
Yeah, it was second by Hunt. Any opposed? None opposed? That motion carries. Next item is R203 of 2022, and this one also comes from the Plan Commission. Alderperson Caravello.
Yep. R203 of 2022, acceptance of public improvements made by RHD Properties LLC for 51 West Development Phase 1, and I so move.
Second.
Second by Alderperson Reeves. Alderperson Caravello.
I'm just gonna throw this one to Rodney if anybody's wants to enlighten us or if people have.
I think that'd be very appropriate. It really didn't come out of the Plan Commission. It was intended to come from the Public Works Committee. It's related to public improvements for the east side of the Highway 51 West development. So we'll have to recommend changing the title in the resolution because we didn't have a quorum at Public Works last week, but there is interest in trying to accept this level of the public improvements on the east side of 51 related to this development. And it's recommended by staff. There's a procedure outlined in the development agreement that authorizes us to make this recommendation to the council for acceptance of the public improvements conditionally, and that's what's being recommended here.
All right. Any questions or comments on this one?
Mr. Mayor? Excuse me?
Alderperson Hunt.
Two of the items, the stormwater management and the vegetation for parkland areas, are not recommended for adoption. Is there a deadline on that, Rodney, for when that?
So there is, we anticipate some additional work in the spring, of course, for the vegetation in the parkland. The development agreement on 51 West actually has a pretty rigorous acceptance period for the stormwater management areas. You might recall the language actually allows or requires the developer to own and operate and maintain them essentially, or maintain them for 3 years before we accept the stormwater management areas, not the storm sewers, but the stormwater management areas. So that's part of the reason that's being conditionally delayed, and likewise for the vegetation. Obviously, they're still doing punch list items now and will be into the spring. And there will be a more formal acceptance of those at a future phase.
So this is more concerning like the retention ponds,
Yes.
not piping and
Correct.
sort?
Yep. Good question.
All right, any other questions on this one? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? None opposed, that motion carries. All right, resolution 204-2022. And then this one here was one that was also, it was at Public Works. And so Public Works, Alderperson, may I ask you, do you want to introduce this one, or I could have Caravello do it? He's on a roll.
Let him do it, he's on a roll.
Okay, go ahead.
Great. Yeah, R204 of 2022, providing Wisconsin Department of Transportation comments on proposed improvements to US Highway 51 from 5th Street to Roby Road, and I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderperson Schumacher. What would you like to do with this one, Alderperson Caravello?
I think hand this one to Rodney, because this one involves, I just want to say that it looks like this one involves the twiddle, so
It does.
very important.
All right, I'll try to get a map up here. Which one would you like, Rodney?
That one would be fine. If you can blow up the top one just a little bit. There's some lane markings on there that are yellow, I believe. If you zoom in a little more, just to give an indication of what's there. The council was introduced to this, you'll recall, prior to the public information meeting that DOT had. They had requested the community as to whether we should introduce this alternative lane configuration to the community, because it wasn't part of the original corridor study planning process. The traffic counts were reconsidered or reevaluated and were projected to actually be more suitable for this type of lane configuration now than they were when we were doing the corridor study over the last 10 years. So therefore, the council did authorize or support introducing this concept to the community at the October public informational meeting. There was a limited number of people there, but certainly there is, at least at my level, some level of support for this type of configuration. And we had an earlier discussion about where you might see this being done in other communities. For those of you that have driven Odana Road on the west side of Madison, that was converted from a four lanes to in either direction to a similar situation with actually quite a bit higher traffic volumes. So what's proposed here is essentially this twiddle type lane configuration from Page to essentially Kingsland Road. Now, it's also important to recognize that if this lane configuration if this lane configuration doesn't work essentially from Van Buren Street out to Kings Lynn, the curb to curb dimension would allow for restriping to occur to reconstruct or reinstall 2 lanes in both directions. There would have to be some slight median modifications at the Hamilton Street intersection if that became necessary. It's not anticipated, but at this point, it would be done by lane markings with the exception of medians at that intersection of Hamilton Street. What it also does, it creates an area alongside the curb. It won't be designated as a bike lane, but it does create an area, a painted lane, if you will, that provides some additional width for bikers that do want to travel with the traffic in those lanes. That also would help to allow for right turning vehicles into driveways to potentially scoot somewhat to the right and more out of the lane of traffic, and allow for cars to go around if there's no one turning in the twiddle lane. So that's the recommendation. DOT supports this type of configuration in this corridor as well. We didn't have an opportunity to discuss it at the committee level. We certainly can, but the DOT is anxious to get some position from the city, one way or the other, of support so that they can continue on with their design work.
All right, any questions or comments on this one from alders?
Yeah.
Alderperson Jensen?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Rodney, I just wanted to voice my support for this configuration as well. One of the things I noticed, because I travel up and down there quite a bit for business, if you're traveling east, heading toward Page Street, it becomes a race. You got cars that are racing to get there ahead of you so they can pull into the lane and keep going on Main Street. So I think it would eliminate that and make it safer. So from a public safety point of view, I think this is the right way to go.
All right, any other comments or questions? Alderperson Caravello.
And Ron, at this point, what is the projected potential timeline for this project?
Different segments of this, but essentially 2020, part of it was 2026, some of it was 2027, I believe. So it's not tomorrow, but certainly trying to facilitate the design going forward and communicate it in future meetings as well. Our public safety folks have at least observed or looked at this type of configuration. It may offer an opportunity for emergency responders to use the twiddle lane if there isn't people in that turn lane. So they're, I don't know if they're encouraged, but they did see that as a potential opportunity in some areas here. One of the other benefits to some and maybe not to others is the single lane of traffic in either way, in either direction, is really going to be controlled by the lead car, the speed wheel. So whether that car is traveling slow, it may have a tendency to reduce the speed or control the speed throughout that corridor differently than it is right now.
Any other questions from you? All right, I have President Hirsch had her virtual hand up, I believe.
Yes, I did. Rodney, I just wanted to, you said that there will be, this allows for a bike lane from Page up to Kings Lynn. Is that on both sides or just one side?
Thank you for highlighting that I didn't really call it a bike lane because it won't be classified a bike lane, but there will be a painted area that bikers may find useful along the curb line, but it can't be marked as such. So, and just to remind the group, we also are planning for a 10-foot wide shared use path along the north side of 51 from Jurtson Street all the way out 51. So that'll also offer an opportunity for bikes and or pedestrians on the north side.
Any follow-up?
No, I was just wondering why you can't call it a bike lane, because it isn't wide enough?
Yeah, there's some standards that the state would have to utilize here to be able to call it a bike lane.
But it will be marked differently.
It'll be a painted line that runs parallel to the curb that'll give more space for a biker to utilize.
Okay.
All right, Alderperson Schumacher.
I've driven on a few different of these transitions in like Fitchburg and Monona both, and I've driven on them both as the two lanes as we have set up currently, and the twiddles as they put them in over the last few years. And there's a great reduction in the traffic and the headaches and the snarls and that you end up getting with this, and traffic seems to move a lot smoother.
All right, anybody else have any thoughts on this one? Alderperson Caravello.
If I could just add a bit of a follow-up to Regina's questioning, there are safer alternative routes through town from 5th Street to Van Buren that are just north and just south of 51. So then you do not have to ride your bike along a heavily trafficked state highway, which is not the safest way to go.
You probably know a thing or two about
I
that.
know a couple of things about that.
All right. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay, all in favor of the resolution, say aye.
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 And any opposed? None opposed, that motion carries. Next item states approval of a contract with City of Stoughton Shared Ride Services, basically for next year, next couple of years. We talked about this earlier at Finance Committee, and we have to go through a bidding process, and Brett, you can help fill in the blanks. So we don't anticipate this actually being on the council until December.
Right.
And I think we had a couple of volunteers to work on the bids.
Yep, the bids will be, the RFP was put out currently and, will be complete by November 15th. At which time then we'll look at or evaluate the bids on there. And, Alder Reeves and, Ozzie Doom, volunteered to look at and evaluate those bids that are coming in. After their evaluation period, then we'll make the recommendation and be able to award the bids in either late November or early December.
And I think as part of the bid process, there's a recommendation from us, and then I believe the state has their own evaluation as well. And somehow they have this magic formula that they throw all the information into, and then they would select, the recipient of the bid. So stay tuned on this one. You'll see it again, but we want to at least let you know we're working on this. Any questions about it? Okay, hearing none, we'll go to the next item, and that is Resolution 205 of 2022. And this one is coming from Stoughton Utilities, and I'll queue up a presentation here. And let's see, who wants to do this motion here? Alderperson Hunt.
Yeah, I would move that we accept the proposal as stated, our 205-2022. Utilities Committee as recommended by City Council 5-0 on 10/17/2022.
So, might have got ahead of myself. So we're going to do a presentation, and are we going to vote on it tonight, or are we going to vote that on the 15th?
I believe the plan is that it will be voted on with the city's budget on the 15th. It is
Okay.
going to be in the city's public hearing, so it would make more sense to do it.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that, Fred.
I'll hold my thought.
Okay, so, but they are here to do a presentation, and as you mentioned, it went through the Utilities Committee, and I think the goal is to have all the budgets approved on November 15th. So I'll get this queued up for you, and then we can run through it. And I believe it starts right here. Does that look right?
Yep.
All right, and just tell me when to advance.
Okay, here, we were here 2 weeks ago and kind of gave you an overview of what you can expect here in our budget tonight. The biggest statement I can make is that our costs are high. You are all aware in your own budgets, in your own lives, costs just continue to go up. We're seeing that very much so in all of our utility costs. So we tried to put together a budget where we could capture what we thought, guessed where our expenses could be. For the budget year 23, we took expenses as if we're seeing them today, plugged those into our 23 numbers. And then for 24, we escalated those costs by 5%. And then the following years after that, we escalated another 3% on top of each of those. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know that's what it's going to be, but that's our guess moving forward. Some notable increases we are aware of in our 23 budget. Health insurance costs, I believe we have 10% in our budget. I believe it landed 8.9, I think was the number I was given. So that's good news. We're already got some savings there. So we have that in our budget. We also have a property insurance increase. As of right now, the last numbers I had, it was 23% for us. I believe AJ is still working on that to see if she can do any more negotiating for us on that front. But we do have the initial proposal in our budget of the 23% increase. In addition, effective January 1st of 2023, our electric, water, and sewer budgets do allocate for a staff increase of 4%. I believe that's consistent with city budget, but I could be wrong. Our capital projects, I said, we are increasing our expenses. We also escalated our capital project costs. Over the next 5 years, we have a pretty extensive or a pretty aggressive capital replacement plan, specifically on the water and sewer departments. Electric, we will see some projects as well in some of those years for some rebuilds for lines, and at our, I think we have a loop that we're adding next year in 23 as well. That has a sizable cost to it, but it's going to increase our reliability for our customers, so it is necessary. Next major thing we have in our budget, again on the water and sewer side, is the DOT project that's coming in. I think we have it slated for 25 and 27 for some borrowings. That cost does come with a very large price tag for us, for our water and sewer departments, outside of what we would normally be able to fund during our budget years. So we are anticipating borrowing for those in 25, and then in 27, we are anticipating a borrowing on the sewer side for some plant upgrades that are necessary. I say all of that with an asterisk to say that we'll reevaluate as we know what costs are. As I said, we have escalated all of our project costs that are built in here. So whatever those, however those fall in the coming years, we'll of course adjust accordingly with rate increases and debt issuances. In the next 5 years, like I said, we do have rate increases proposed for all 3 of the utilities. Next year, 23, we do have a proposed rate increase on the electric side. The biggest driver for that is going to be our purchase power costs. When I looked at the budget, when I was reviewing it today, we are anticipated and expecting our purchase power costs to be more than $1 million more than what we had in 21. So I think it's time that we go in for a rate case and have those rates adjusted to reflect that, because we don't anticipate those purchase power costs coming down anytime soon. So that is our plan for 23, is to go in for an electric rate case. And I'll walk through as we flip through the slides as to when we can expect it for water and sewer. So this is just a general overview. I'm just showing very, very simple terms, the revenues and expenses and our anticipated income for budget year 23 for all 3 of our utilities. And then our rate of returns on the electric and water side, as you know, those are Public Service Commission regulated. The wastewater is not, so it does not have a rate of return there for you. The electric rate of return that's listed there does include a 5% increase, overall revenue requirement increase. The Public Service Commission has increased the rate of return to 6% is what we have been hearing that utilities have been receiving. I think our last rate case was 4.9. So that's a driver too, and that increase that we are expecting next year for the electric department. If we move forward, some things I want, and this is very hard to read, I apologize, it's very small, but some things I wanted to point out and explain. You'll see we have a percentage change column there, right there in red, and I wanted to point out like the transmission and distribution expenses. We see it's going up 21.3% from what we're estimating in 22. A couple reasons for that. We have some substation maintenance and repairs that we have planned that are necessary, and that comes to the price of about $100,000. So that is included in there. We have some pole inspections that are going to be necessary, and that's got a cost of about $15,000. And then we are also budgeting for one of our lineman positions that is currently vacant. So it's also included in that line item. The next one you'll see looks out of place. Oh, I can scroll back up, I'm sorry. The customer accounting and collections, you'll see that one actually is we anticipate it to go down. The reason for that is because of the strategic alignment that was just put into place here earlier, a couple months ago. With that strategic alignment, some of the job duties have shifted, and so we need to allocate those in different accounts. So the funds that we had budgeted in that category are being shifted to the administrative and general category. So that is a part of the increase that you're seeing in the administrative and general category of, I think it's 29.6%. In addition, this category also covers health insurance. So we had a number of positions that we hired for after the strategic alignment was approved. Without knowing what their family situation is, of course, we needed to budget for family health insurance for all of those positions. So you'll see dollars in there for that as well. Other notable expenses that we have would be our landscaping of our main building that was slated to occur this year. We're going to move that to 23. Time just didn't allow for that this year. As well as we have our parking lot at our main building needs some attention as well. So there are funds in there to address that as well. Okay, we can go ahead and slide on. This is just in visual terms. Obviously, we want these lines to be as gradual as possible. You'll see some of the, there you go. So the capital expenditures that one there in the bottom left-hand corner, you see it just spiking all over the place. Our goal is obviously to have that as smooth as possible, but there are just some needs that we need to address that are kind of causing the spike there. In addition, the sales of our kilowatt hours, that's kind of jumping all over the place. We can't predict that. We can't control that, obviously. But the rest of our trends there are, for the most part, moving at a steady pace there. And then the next slide will show just a lot of numbers, a lot of things going on here, but the figures you really want to pay attention to are highlighted in green. The first one being the rate of return. Let me just flip to myself here. So I said in the previous slide, we're anticipating a 5.43% increase, or rate of return next year in the electric department for 23. I did, as I looked out as far as expenses and capital projects, I assumed the rate of return would stay close to 6%. Again, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know that that's going to be the case. So I assigned for another rate increase in 26, that one at 2%, to keep our rate of return at a mark that allows us to keep recovering dollars to put back into our infrastructure. The next green section is going to be unrestricted cash on hand. These are the dollars we have to put into our, pay for our expenses, invest back into our infrastructure. The goal there is 5 months. We do move around a little bit depending on the year and the expenses, but overall, we're close to the target here. We plan to be close to the target for each of these years. And the last one is just our debt ratio, our debt coverage. It jumps in 23 because we are paying off some debt in 23. So it jumps quite a bit there, but those all are in good shape for us. I think for the revenues, I think I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but I'll reiterate, for the electric department, we are aware, and I should say all of our utilities, we are aware of developments that we anticipate are coming next year. So in order to account for usage for those, we increased the electric usage by 0.5%, and thought hopefully that was a reasonable amount. That is across the board, as we discussed last week. So that is built into the revenues that we have in our budget here tonight. The water and sewer we kept flat because we do see those trends declining at a faster rate. We figured if there were any kind of increase, hopefully it would keep us flat. So that's what we've used for our water and sewer revenues here for the 23 and moving forward budget. Go ahead. If there's any questions for electric, I can stop there. Otherwise, I'd be happy to move on. Yeah.
So for 2023, did I see a 5% increase for ratepayers?
That is the plans. So the way that works is that is a revenue requirement increase. It doesn't necessarily mean that customers will see 5% increase on their bill. The actual rate design will be determined by the Public Service Commission. But trying to, with our increased expenses and the projects that we have coming, and getting us as close to that 6% rate of return that we're authorized to have, I anticipate it's going to be around 5%. The last one, rate increase we had was in July of 2020. That was to 2.76%.
Other person, Caravello?
And I think it might have been on one of the first pages of the presentation, but there was something that had the designation of the customers by, I guess, their usage, like, you know, small power, large power, industrial. It was on that page after the next, right there. And I'm wondering about how those
Percentages?
those percentages about those customers and those customer levels or designations.
So for the usage, I took what we anticipate 22 is going to be for usage, and then I added the 0.5% usage for each of those classes, and then in the, I think I added like 50 new customers in the residential category. Ultimately, those percentages, when it comes to the percentage change, at this point, they're kind of placeholders, because when we go in for a rate increase, for a rate case, the Public Service Commission will really determine who is driving each of those cost increases in our budget, and will determine which one of those categories gets what their increase is. So for now, they're kind of placeholders just to get us up to that revenue requirement. Does that make sense?
Any questions from Zoomers before we move on? Awfully quiet out there. I see a smile, so at least I know you're hearing us. Okay, where were we?
Here we go. I think that was good.
This one?
So maybe scroll up to the previous one, I think.
Alrighty.
I think that's good.
Water?
Yes, perfect. So on the water side, again, I wanted to point out some of the, in the percent change column, you'll see some numbers there that I wanted to explain. So operating expenses, the pumping costs, we have an estimate of 22.5% increase. That is due to some well rehab work we have at well number 4, and that is the tune of $25,000. So that is accounting for the increase that we see there. The next section, I think, is water treatment. I apologize, I can't read that far. Is the water treatment cost, we expect to go up 49%. There, it's about $17,000 is directly related to the DNR water sampling that we have to do. So that's a big driver in that category. And the other side of that is we have some of the wage adjustments that occurred. We're planning for a full year of those adjustments, and some of that falls into that category as well.
Any questions on the water?
I do have, I'm going to point out one more. Sorry, Mayor.
Oh.
The administrative and general category, we have an increase there of 23.9%. That is for, again, the increased health insurance costs, and for the parking lot and for landscaping that we are planning for 23. And that decrease that you have there that we see of negative 15.7%, that actually has to do with a work order that we had to expense out this year. I think it was like $80,000, and we're not anticipating that moving forward in future years. So that's where the decrease is coming from there. And then, like I said, the water department, we are not forecasting for any usage increase there. We kept our revenues flat with what we're seeing today. We do have, yep, and again, our capital expenditures, you'll see we're jumping all over the place. We do anticipate a lot of water main and sewer replacements coming here in the next 5 years, which is more than what we are normally spending each year in our capital projects. So you're seeing these large spikes, but it really is our best opportunity to follow when the streets get replaced, to get in there and paint and replace these water mains, because we don't want to have to dig up a road, a brand new road, should something break. And then here again, a lot of numbers, but I think if we focus on the green numbers, those are really the most important ones. Rate of returns we're expecting for 23. We had a rate increase last year, if you recall. The authorized rate of return was 5%. For 23, we're anticipating it being 4.27%, which is not too bad considering the rising costs that we're seeing. We're hoping to be as close to that 5% as we can. Cash on hand, we are not doing a lot of, we're easing up on our capital projects in 23 to prepare for what we have coming in the coming years. So our cash on hand does increase a little bit at the end of 23 to about 9 months on hand. But we're going to need those cash dollars to pay for the projects that we are anticipating in the following years. In 24, we are anticipating a simplified rate case for water. That used to be 3%. The Public Service Commission has upped that to 4.5%. I'm anticipating that will stay the same. So I do have that allocated for in 24. And then in 25 and 27 to pay for those capital projects. I do have budgeted or allocated rate increases for each of those years at full rate cases, which means we go into the Public Service Commission and we go through the 6 to 9 month process. But then our debt coverage ratio, we're supposed to be at 1.3 each year. We're meeting that easily moving forward, so that's in good shape there on the water side.
Any question on the water before we continue?
Got one comment in there.
Go ahead.
I'll still, like I was saying in the last meeting about finding out how the changes are going to be, especially, excuse me, on the water side of it, when we get some of these bigger industrial companies coming in and see what their actual usage is. So I would be surprised to see if they would remain flat. But especially when I just think of like Zinc Power is probably will be a large water user. I don't think Emmy Roth will be as big of a water user, but if they're cleaning equipment, they may well become a larger water user than what you might be anticipating.
Yeah, and obviously we don't want to overestimate, so we're going to go into it, and as we see their actual usage, we can plan from there. We certainly don't want to anticipate something and then not have it.
Right.
But yeah, obviously we adjust every year based on what we're seeing.
Jill's looking for a large water user, if you know one.
Right.
Yeah, we could use a couple, yeah.
I really am, because if you look at our top, we've got a few very large water users, but they're the 10th one, and it's very, very small water user, it's basically nearly a residential customer, so we have a very few large, yes, let everybody know we've got a lot of capacity, so big water industry.
And I can tell you when we, do our borrowing for our CIP and also the utility borrowing, it's something that Moody's looks at is our large industrial users. And then they also want to know if there's going to be, any future movement in that area. So, it's something that we're always hopeful that we'll get. Obviously in water, there's been a lot of emphasis on conservation, and I think we see that.
I think definitely more so than the electric side of it. So yeah, absolutely. We just see those keep going down and down.
Offhand, do we know, speaking of Zinc Power, do we know if their plating process, is that a natural gas user more so or an electrical user more so?
My understanding is they, compared to what they use for electric, it's more natural gas.
Okay, that's what I thought. And I wonder if they might get a crossing point if natural gas gets too expensive. Anyway.
That would be great.
Yep.
For that. I do hope to get into that plant. I haven't had the opportunity to tour it yet, but that is kind of a goal for 23 is to be able to see that facility and see a little bit more of what they've got going on.
If you get in there, I'd be happy to come along with.
Okay. I'll let you know.
All right, so that takes us to wastewater.
You bet. Okay, so I'll point out again the change category there, some notable increases. For the sewer plant expenses, we're anticipating a 23.2% increase, and that's due largely, our sludge disposal costs, are going up $30,000. So we have that allocated in there. The treatment plant needs a parking lot and some maintenance on their facility, and then also at our main facility. They pay for a part of that as well. And then the landscaping that we're moving forward into 23 as well is included in that.
Is the sludge removal cost, is that the trucking, or is that availability of land, or what are the issues there?
Ultimately, the trucking. What we're finding consistently across the board is those costs are going up exponentially as well. But that actually trend started really before, I would say, COVID and kind of what we're feeling right now. More and more of those haulers are getting further into industrial waste as opposed to municipal waste. There's supposedly more revenue there. So there's fewer haulers that are actually dealing with municipal waste. Therefore, the prices continue to go up. It's something that we're very watchful of. Between what seems to be springs and falls where it tends to be very wet and be able to get onto the fields. So we've got storage tank issues or concerns there, but also just really those rising costs and see what opportunities. We have been talking with some neighbors, seeing if there's some opportunities there to kind of revise how we address that at this point in time, but nothing's really moved forward. So we have to use those haulers to be able to transport that to the field.
Yeah, I know it's been more competitive to find fields as well. I went out a few years ago, and it's an interesting process.
It is, and that's kind of one of the things that we're looking to do is possibly partner in a way to give up our fields, quote unquote. And this is very early in discussion, but to at least leverage our fields. If something were to happen with that relationship, we'd want our fields back, but as a way to maybe gain a partner to help offset those rising costs for transportation and injection.
The next category I wanted to point out here is the administrative in general. We see a 20.1% increase there. That's largely, we have, for the most part of 2022, we've had a vacant operator position at the sewer department. We are anticipating filling that position, as well as family health insurance coverage for that individual, because obviously we're not sure what that will be. But that's a large part of the increase that we're seeing there. The sewer, if we want to move on to the, again, highlighted green numbers here for us. Now, the sewer department doesn't have a rate of return. That's governed here locally and not at the Public Service Commission. So that's not a figure that we look for. But we do watch our cash on hand as well as our debt coverage. The sewer utility does roller coaster more so than the water and water and electric utilities do as far as cash flow. You see that it's we don't get to close to 5 months on hand until about 26 because of those projects that we need to fund. We do have a debt issuance in 25, that's the DOT project, and then in 27, at this time, we have this slated for 27, that is for some work at our wastewater treatment plant, for some upgrades there. Those are the dollars that we're seeing. But then again, our debt coverage, again, it's 1.1 is what we need to have for their wastewater treatment plant, and we meet that every year. So we're not concerned with that. Again, we had, flat forecasted usage for our sewer utility. We will, of course, reevaluate that as we see new customers come online or developments occur. I can't emphasize enough that this is a very fluid document because we do not know what costs or projects are going to occur, when these debt issuances are going to take place, and what the true rate cases will be. But we wanted to put together something that we thought we had a plan in place should the environment that we're in right now continue to rise. So we feel good with what we've got. And hopefully we can come back and say, oh, it wasn't as high as we thought it was going to be. That's the goal here. But any questions for the sewer department? Anna, would you like to go through CIP?
Yep, absolutely, thank you. Kind of, I guess, reiterate the rising costs. So we just actually got a notice yesterday that our transformers, those that have already on order, are going up 16%. We'd actually got another previous one, I think that when we first had ordered some of these, it said 12%. And we even had a situation where we ordered some, got one pricing. After a month into that order, they actually declined and said they couldn't, one, make us those transformers. They were that far behind, but also, they couldn't honor that cost. So there is a tremendous amount of pressure that we have from a financial standpoint of where these costs are going to go. They seem to be continuing to go through the roof. We're hoping that isn't what continues going forward, but we don't have any end in sight at this point in time. So we try to do our very best to make these costs as true as we believe they could be today. But definitely on the high side, we hope. So if we go on to the next, and this is actually, that sheet is just basically the capital improvement projects, and just a totaling of those. But as we look at electric and kind of what our plans here over the next 5 years, and to kind of give an overview there, is to really start looking at our SCADA or OMS. Those are great opportunities to, one, have a better understanding real time the health of our system, but also a mechanism for us to also engage with our customers so they know real time if there's an outage, that they're, we know they're affected, and will be an opportunity really to have that customer engagement. Give them an opportunity to also know, we think that we're going to be able to get you back with power at this time. It'll minimize some of the phone calls that are, our staff are taking on that police dispatch would need to take on. There's things in the budget ultimately for that purpose and that goal. From the distribution side and some of those projects that you see there as well, those are looking at our 5-year study. So just as a comment here, and I'll go through these individually, but the Lake Loop, that would be distribution SW6, tie with the circuit. Right now that's a radial feed, and that radial feed feeds up to the lake. And if we were to get the wrong car versus pole, a number of customers could be out for a very long time, and we do not have the ability to backfeed them from another direction. So again, looking at opportunities and to make our system more reliable and to help with our customers' engagement, and so they've got that, and so that we have a better understanding of the system health. So the AMI, MR enhancements, right now most of our meters are AMR. We will be transitioned to AMI. We'd read those. We've just got, from a communication standpoint, though, the need through those 5 years to maintain communications with those meters. Distribution capacity, this is basically an area where we have projects, if it's overhead to underground, if it's system maintenance that we have to do, this lives in this space. Because we've got that lake loop planned, usually we have about $500,000 allocated in that line item. We actually adjusted that each year depending on what other major projects we had going on. So for this year we'd allocated the $100,000 because we've got, for 23, because we've got that large Lake Loop project going. We anticipated, because of that Lake Loop project and some other ones that we've got going, we'll have to go to the PSC for approval of those, and that's the reference on the CA. Our SCADA then, and the work that we're doing there, and that goes out for years into the future, is really working a couple different things that helps knowing where those outages are more quickly with line sensors so that they flash actually when we're out patrolling, but also so that we've got the software set up to be able to get that information back to our facility and then basically allocate that through the outage management system. East Substation, we've been working on this project for quite a while. This is basically our regulators, and this actually protects our substation, so we've upgraded those, and we'll be finishing that project up in 23. And then north, we've got regulators planned also to upgrade those, so again, further protect our substations. Transformers, typically we had actually, because of all the developments going forward and because of the rising cost of transformers, we've got $775,000 allocated for that. Transformers have pretty much doubled, in some cases on the higher end, probably nearly tripled in cost. So that's basically a placeholder that we've got on transformers that we needed to order to be prepared for those developments that are coming in. After that, we are thinking that maybe development will flatten out a little bit. So right now we've got $200,000 there after. In 24, again, continuing on with our capacity, our maintenance projects, as well as then those system improvements. And so, the rebuild of County Highway would be in 24, though, the new feeder N1 to loop. That's actually for reliability, to increase reliability to our North Industrial Park. I'm probably gonna, unless there's questions on those projects, I don't know if you'd like more deep involvement of each item, but kind of an overview of the project on the electric side. Any questions? Okay. Fleet, I have to say, that's another opportunity, and I'll get this reference through our entire budget. We had, I think, back before what we're in right now is a bucket truck. We could have spent about $280,000. We're now looking at budgeting $320,000. We're hopeful that that price flattens out, but we just actually met with vendors yesterday and today, and it looks like we may be right at that point. And so we've been, just to keep those replacements going forward, we've budgeted on, we hope and believe on the high side. Also, we've got a pull trailer and some other improvements. The pull trailer is actually was bought used in '95, and every time we take it out, it can be maintained at Public Works, so it's time for replacing that. On the water side and wastewater side, what we've got here is we worked very collaboratively with the city as far as, what projects need to go forward. I think one of the things that we've got for the opportunity over the 5 years, also that Shannon highlighted, is the fact that we've got DOT work in 25, 26, and 27, and we did advance those projects. DOT had said they could be advanceable to those years, so we budgeted to those years. Kind of in a way, that work from a street standpoint is being done and paid for by DOT. We have the utilities on, underground that we need to pay for, and then also there's a desire to keep moving forward with city projects. And so we've kind of have almost double what we would normally spend, even more than that actually, on a typical CIP year. So we've got it very aggressive, but wanted to keep again with meeting the needs of our customers and also meeting the needs of the city. So next year, really, like Shannon had referenced, we've got a very light year. We're just doing one block of North Street from a reconstruction standpoint. But then in 24, we're doing the area around 4th Street, 5th Street, and South Street, South Street, and that's true for both water and wastewater. And one thing I'd like to highlight is there is different needs. We do plan to replace water and sewer in each of those areas, but the dollar values may be significantly different if you were to compare them between water and wastewater, because in some cases we actually replaced water and didn't necessarily touch sewer and vice versa, and so we're just allocating those dollars appropriately for the needs that are in those three sections. And then in 25 we've got Harding and Grant, obviously DOT 51, reconstruction, Taft and Wilson. In 26 we've got Highway 51, McKinley, Prairie, and Taft. And then in 27, we've got 51 and North Forest. And then for other things of importance, I guess, reference, we do allocate anything, even the low dollar amounts. We've got a valve turner this next year for $3,500, and basically meter needs that we have going forward there. Not until 27 do we anticipate any kind of fleet replacement for water. Questions on the water CIP? Okay. And then for wastewater, just kind of going through there, and I won't highlight the same projects again, but they reflect basically where we just went through those street sections. We'll also have those wastewater needs. We also do have some plant upgrades that we're anticipating. We're going to watch those very closely. One of them in particular in 27 is related. Our phosphorus regulations are going down from 1 to 0.6. And right now we use very little alum or any chemical treatment to be able to achieve that phosphorus number. We're kind of anticipating that we might be able to still live in that space, and basically if we need alum, we're able to live with tote. If in the end we need that chemical in bulk, if we're having a hard time meeting that phosphorus requirement, we will be needing to put up a storage facility in an additional building. So there's some things that we've got budgeted in that case. And then we've got fleet needs. We do have for 23 a high capacity bypass pump. We're just recognizing that from a resiliency standpoint, if something were to go wrong, we would need that pump, whether that is one of our, we had the situation on Jefferson and Main Page Court, where we had potentially the sewer that could have collapsed. It was, football shaped. If that had occurred, we would have immediately needed a high capacity pump. If we had a situation where our crews that actually lift the waste into the plant were to stop working, we would need a high capacity pump, and we'd need it immediately. There wouldn't be an opportunity for us to run out and rent it or go through that. It would be an immediate need, and without it, we would have very quickly would have the potential to have discharge into the river. So we want to make sure that we've kind of got ourselves protected so that we will have that available to us.
I just got a quick question about, so it pumps water?
It would pump water or sewage, yep.
Because in the past, we've had to rent pumps for other things, stormwater, Pearl Beach, those types of things, and I don't know if this pump would be able to be used for something like that instead of renting it from somebody else.
It would be, and we've talked through that. We didn't approach the city on it specifically because we're a little bit nervous that when we need it, you guys are going to need it too. because a lot of this is stormwater driven. And one of the biggest opportunities at wastewater is our collection system. We get a lot of I&I. We get a lot of clear water, we get a lot of heavy rains, and then a lot of infiltration occurs into our collection pipes, and then it makes it to the plant. If there's ever a time there where we see that we wouldn't have a need, it's just that the problem I think that we could run into is if you're using it and we need it, we need
Right.
it. Yeah.
No,
so-
that's understandable. I think that's something we can talk about offline.
Absolutely. Yep. They're definitely open to it. Just we want to make sure we protect each other.
Bill, I got one
You bet.
question for
Of
you.
course.
The, on the phosphorus level, that's, it's a change, a state level change in ppm from 1 point whatever to 0.6. Is that what you?
From 1 to 0.6.
Okay. I'll talk with you offline. I might have some ideas on how you can sequester phosphorus a little bit better.
Excellent. I love it. Thank you. I like it because I really have to say some of these plant upgrades, some of them are, I would say, very much as needed. Some of them, yes, the plant is getting to the end of its useful life, but there's still a lot of redundancy there that I think there's some things that we can kind of leverage and try to push those out timing-wise. And any help, I would take any help you've got to provide. So thank
One
you.
of the, like, if you can sequester it, I mean, then that also then becomes a saleable product then thereafter, so.
Very interested. Thank you. Any questions on wastewater?
Oh, yeah.
All right, hearing no questions on wastewater, we'll keep going.
Technical operations is kind of the where everything else sort of lives. So if it's not specific to water, if it's a bit specific to the utility overall, we've got administration building, we've got a remodel. We'd actually plan to do that this year. It's going to be done actually next year. We would build stuffing machine, physical security with a dark fiber that we've put into. We want to do some improvements on physical security. We did have a situation where we had copper theft and a variety of different things, and so we want to enhance our physical security going forward, and so that's basically where these things are captured that are in the budget. Any questions on technical operations?
Like the concept of dark fiber.
Me too. We'll be leveraging that more and more as we put OMS together, because again, all of the data that we get from our substations, from our wells, from our lift stations all come to us directly, then we're able to then distribute that out from there. So it's a huge improvement because there's been 2 substations that we have not had communications. We've had communications issues going back 5 years. And, they keep getting worse as that, basically radio antennas are starting to deteriorate and that communication is getting worse.
All right, are there any questions about the presentation? So the resolution would come back with the rest of them on November 15th. And I just want to say, Shannon, outstanding. You've been here less than a year, and you've been able to put this together, so congratulations for that.
Thank you. I actually was reflecting last year when we did this, everything was still all virtual. So I was excited to be able to come tonight and we didn't have to do everything virtual. So a lot's happened in a year. Thank you.
And to echo that as well, Shannon's been amazing. And, our last year's budget, I thought about this as well, is she had probably 2 weeks to prepare an entire utility budget. So she's done a phenomenal job, and we're really grateful to have her.
All right, any final thoughts from council members? All right, you're dismissed.
Very
All
good.
right,
Thank you.
thank you.
And then some more
Let's
work.
see. Next item is number 13, the Crew Hotel property valuation litigation for 2021 and 2022. We have the ability to go into closed session. Matt, how would you like us to proceed here?
We have Ryan. Ryan, are you here?
Yeah, he's sitting in the peanut gallery. You can come up to one of the seats, Ryan. Just
I think
anywhere.
I'm going to let Ryan decide how to proceed because he's there and he knows what's going on.
And then if you feel a need to go into closed session, just let us know. But you can probably just start out by kind of letting us know where we think we're at.
Sure. So we had this up at the last meeting, and we had a closed session discussion, and there have been some settlement negotiations since then, and I've got a proposed resolution to bring back to you that is in line or better than what we had discussed previously. So I'm happy to give another overview, or I'm not sure what you guys are looking for in terms of approval tonight. But I think we're in a position to hopefully move forward and accept what's on the table.
So I guess I would open it up to the council members. Do you have a preference how you want to proceed? Do you want a more in-depth explanation? If you do, we could possibly go into closed session. Or I think what we have is something that was negotiated within the guidelines that you'd sent out the last time. So if you're okay with that, you could make a motion in the open session to authorize that. So I guess it's up to you guys what you'd like to do.
Stay in open session.
Yeah.
If we can close this out tonight, let's do it.
Yeah,
Are we allowed to mention specific amounts?
I would defer to Ryan as far as, what you want to share in an open meeting and what maybe you wouldn't want to share. I think we have an agreement, but it hasn't been signed yet.
Right, I mean, I think we would just basically talking about the current numbers and what the proposed numbers would be and what the refund would be, and ultimately that would be public record in terms of, the agreement would be public record. So I'm happy to present that, and you guys can vote on that in open session if everybody's okay.
Sounds good.
All right, so just to kind of review the basics, we have the Hilton True Hotel, and currently we have 2021 and 2022 in litigation, and the assessment in both years is $8,755,300. And the proposal before you tonight would be to resolve the 2021 assessment at an assessed value of $5.5 million, and the 2022 assessment at an assessed value of $7 million. And so the assessed value would be changed for 2022 before the tax bills went out. There would be no refund payment associated with 2022. And for 2021, there would be a refund that I've calculated at $62,632.89. There would be a waiver of the interest, and of course, each side responsible for their fees and costs, and the case would be dismissed with an agreement that would, obviously provide for no additional appeal for, 22 is already pending. So 2023 is completely separate, and the assessor is free to stay at $7 million or go back to $8,755,300 or come up with some other number, and they would be free to appeal that if they thought it was too high.
Alderperson Hunt?
We had some question about how we would pay the refund. Is that still an issue?
That was something that I believe staff was going to look into in terms of the use of the TIF funds. That wasn't something that I had looked into.
Okay. I just had a question. Could we simply give them a reduction in what they owe this year, rather than actually giving them a refund, giving them a credit, basically?
I don't think, that's certainly not what they're proposing. They're proposing to get the refund of the $62,000, and if we were going to try to do some kind of a credit, I think we have to ultimately agree to a further reduction of 2022 and basically put all of 21 onto 2022. But that would be a whole different discussion, and they'd probably view that as a different offer that they may or may not.
Okay. Let's not confuse it.
Yeah, better to.
I didn't hear you.
I said we've got, obviously we have an agreement, let's not confuse it.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts or questions on this? I would entertain a motion.
I'd make a motion to accept the offer.
Is that good enough language?
Yeah, I think basically just to approve the settlement and to authorize the
Approve the
appropriate
settlement.
city staff to sign the agreement.
Okay, then you can work out the language with the clerk, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay, and I heard a second by
Second.
Alderperson Caravello. Any discussion on this?
Sounds like a good offer.
Okay, hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 And any opposed? That motion carries. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Jensen, is there a second?
I'll second.
Caravello? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed, that motion carries. Thank you, have a great night, everybody.